lecture series, final edition for 2025. I really appreciate you all making it out in a rainstorm today. I'm so glad we had a bunch of rain. Are you happy we got finally a bunch of rain? Whew, it's been dry. It's been really dry. Well, I'm Ron Fain. I'm with Fain Signature Group. I'm a part of the team that puts these events on, and of course our company sponsors these events. And our whole purpose here is to help bring information to you folks, the people that drive the economic engine in our community, whether you're white-collar, blue-collar, entrepreneurial, family business, corporate, it doesn't matter, because each and every day you're making a difference for Prescott Valley and the Quad City area. So give yourself a round of applause. You become the most important part of community. The reason we have good growth, the reason we have sustainable growth, the reason schools are good, it all begins in a room right here with the business community. So, and I really mean that, because without you folks, there'd be no reason to want to live here or be here, or that, people would move away because there are no services. So you provide a very vital part of our community. And I just really do want you to walk away with how important you are to the economic engine of Prescott Valley. And the main reason we want to put these series on is to provide you information that you can go out into community, out into your workforce, and make a difference. You make a difference every single day. But as you all know, we're a growing retirement community, and that's wonderful. These are great people here, but you're the people that are in the trenches every single day, making a difference and providing you with good information to help keep our economy going strong is vital to everybody. So I appreciate you being here. We're getting ready to plan next year, 2026. We're going to have already a lot of good ideas for a series that builds one off the other for next year. So keep your eye out for that. And nothing else really to say here other than I'd like to introduce my brother, who is the CEO of Fain Signature Group. And he's been growing our company. We just added a new division, Founders Builders Group, that has been an audacious task that he's taken, and it's actually done quite well. A lot more employees, a lot more people to think about, but he is also a fellow mountaineer with Ed. So, Brett? Thanks, Mom. So we started the first year of our construction company, and we decided to take on Legato as our first construction process. So a lot of people said we couldn't get it done, but we did, and I think that ties in nicely to what we're happening here today. I wouldn't call myself a mountaineer. I did happen to meet Ed on a mountain. Ed guided me on a mountain in the United States, but I'm no longer a mountaineer. He's a mountaineer. But I think the risk we took with Legato and starting that construction company to rebuild, I think is going to tie nicely into today and what Ed's going to talk to you about. Because Ed, he's not your average mountaineer. I think he was the first American to summit all 14 8,000-meter mountains in the world unassisted. That means they're on oxygen. And he did it on his own, and he did it, maybe the traditional way. And so it's a really unique, elite group that he's a part of. He now guides people up and down mountains. But in that process of being preparing for that, he has to be very focused. He has to understand preparation for what he's going to experience on the mountain and what he can plan for and what he can't plan for with weather and other conditions, and calculated risk. And I think we're going to hear a little bit about calculated risk and how that his experience on the mountain ties into our experience in the workforce every day and every year. So his accomplishments are not just about his physical strength, as I said, but they're also rooted in his planning, his unwavering discipline, and his deep respect for the situation he's in, which is the mountain. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ed Viesturs to the stage to give us a talk. Thank you. Microphone? Yes. Oops, thank you. Got to catch my breath. Had some steps to climb. People should quit smoking. No, I'm kidding. Thanks to Brad and Ryan for bringing me in. Beautiful facility. I had the monsoon rain to welcome me. And a little secret about this room, which hasn't been used much, we're going to actually refrigerate the room now and we're going to suck the oxygen out. Because what I like to do is for a marathon, you get to watch and feel what it feels like to go to above 26,000 feet. And I'm going to talk about a career, something that I've spent my adult life immersed in. I started climbing in 1977, so do the math. The further I go, the longer it gets, and I don't like to even talk about how long that is. But it's something that I have been doing full on, and I made a career out of it. And it's something that I love to do. And the big question is, very often, why do you do what you do? How do you do it for so long? What's the deal, right? And you either get it or you don't, and that's fine. But what I like about mountaineering, and especially climbing these really super big high peaks, is it's hard. And I like things that are hard, things that I've got to plan for, prepare for, and then I get tested. And it's the process that you have to be passionate about. Because when I go on one of these big giant expeditions, that single event, from the time I leave till I get home, that could be 3 months doing one mountain. And prior to that, I got 6 or 8 months or 9 months to get ready to climb that thing, to prepare, to plan, to train physically, to get strength and endurance, to prepare myself mentally for something that's really hard, the logistics, raising the money, putting a team together, getting all the permits, all the transportation, and I call that doing my homework. Because if I don't do my homework and if I don't do it well, I probably won't succeed. And it's actually my fear of failure that is my motivator. Because if I got the time to get ready, it's my own fault if I failed for the lack of doing that. And when you go on one of these mountains, no matter how hard you've prepared, how much money you spend, how far you've traveled, there's never a guarantee of success. These mountains test you. And the higher you go, the harder the test. As we climb above 26,000 feet, approaching 29,000 feet, it gets harder. It gets colder, windier, the air gets thinner. It's almost as if the mountain is pushing you back, and you have to learn how to push back as well. How to be patient, how to be resilient, and how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's the big thing. But there's not a guarantee of success, but if everything goes right and nothing goes wrong, you get to the summit. And that is an amazing feeling, to stand on the tip top of one of these mountains. This is the summit of a peak that's 27,000 feet high, and the summit is the size of this table, and you just kind of stand up there. And that is a very rewarding feeling. And then you look down, and then you look back on all that investment, the time, the energy, the effort, the money, and you say, wow, now I know why I do what I do. I get it, right? That's your reward. And that's simply why I do it. There's no trophy up there. There's no gold medal. Nobody else cares. As long as you care, it's important. And that's why I do what I do. No guarantee of success, but there is a guarantee of risk. And people think that we go into the mountains and we seek the risk. And it's completely opposite for what I think. I try to avoid risk. And one of the things I didn't know that I would learn was how to manage risk. That's what keeps you alive. And in the mountains, I divide the risk into 2 different categories. We have objective risk, the things we can't control, the things that are present and unavoidable, storms and avalanches and rockfall, all that kind of stuff that can get us. And we can't ignore it. We kind of have to monitor it and manage it. But in my opinion, the biggest category of risk, the thing that gets people the most, kills people, injuries, accidents, is the subjective part. It's the decision making. What price are you willing to pay for the sake of success? And you can imagine when people go into these mountains, for a lot of them, a big giant peak like Everest, it could be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They spend a lot of time and energy getting there. Money's involved, pressure. They want notoriety. Right now, it's all about social media. And they then get influenced by what I call external pressures to succeed for others rather than for themselves.
And in the face of harsh weather or lateness of the day, they keep going. Arrogance, hubris, ambition, all those things pile up. And that, for the most part, is what gets people. I love climbing, but what I like more is being alive. And so I decided years and years ago that climbing a mountain has to be a round trip, right? My number one goal when I go on a trip, my number one goal is to make sure I get home. Everything else is secondary. So a lot of things that I learned over the course of my career. And about 15 years ago, somebody suggested that I talk about it, that I write about it. Never planned on doing that. I had journals, thankfully, and I worked with a co-writer who was an adventure writer, climber. So together we put this book together, and I wanted to just talk about, again, the process, right? Do something well, take your time, don't take a shortcut, and when you do succeed and get to the top, you want to look back on that trail of footprints and be proud about how you got to where you got, right? And for me, the title was perfect. And the book has done really well for a climbing book. I think it would have sold more had I titled it Shortcuts to the Top, right? What's the secret? But also it inspires people as well. That was kind of my goal, and to tell a story. And because I was inspired by a book. This is this book that I read as a kid in high school, growing up in the great mountaineering state of Illinois. And it's the story of an expedition to a mountain called Annapurna. Now, this was in 1950, and Annapurna is one of only 14 mountains in the world over 8,000 meters, which is anything above 26,000 feet. Everest being the highest at 29,000 feet. And this is where all the 8,000-meter peaks are. They're in the Himalaya range. And in 1950, none of the 8,000-meter peaks had been climbed, not even Everest, although it had been attempted many times. So a pretty small team from France, French climbers, they climbed in the Alps, they were really good at climbing. They go to the Himalaya for the first time, pretty small team, 8 climbers. They had a base camp manager, they had a doctor with them, they had a few local staff members, and literally in those days you stepped off the map, right, into the unknown. No form of communication. You might write a letter and the letter would get home after you got home. That's how long it took to communicate. And they worked together as a team for 3 months. They battled together on that mountain, and they succeeded. They got to the summit of Annapurna, the first 8,000-meter peak ever to be climbed. Not all of them got to the top. 2 people, only 2 people of the team. And I'll talk about how the logistics of all that works. But that's what you sign up for. You go on one of these big expeditions, you go as a team, you collaborate, everybody does their role and responsibility, and you know in the end, you might not be one of the people to go to the top, but you contributed to that success. And for some reason, that story, the adventure, the equipment, the struggle, the cool success that they finally had, the physical part, that intrigued me to the point where I thought, that is now what I want to go do because of that book. It flipped a switch. And I thought, I as well now want to go and climb Everest. Or I want to go climb Annapurna. How am I going to do that? I know zero about mountaineering. How do I do that? And I said, if I start right now learning, gaining experience, meeting people, maybe in 10 years, I could go and try Everest. So I gave myself a 10-year window. A lot of steps I had to take. The first biggest step I had to take was to get the hell out of Illinois, right? So right out of high school, I decided to move to Seattle, Washington. I'd read so many great mountaineering books about American mountaineers who came from the Pacific Northwest. It's a beautiful city surrounded by alpine peaks. We got Mount Rainier in the distance, 2 hours away, 14,400 feet high. And I said, this is the hub. I'm going to immerse myself in this place and meet the people I need to meet. So that, for me, initially was going to be my hobby. I'm going to start climbing mountains. I had a plan as a kid as well. I knew what I wanted to do professionally. I wanted to be a veterinarian. And I knew it was going to be really, really hard to get into veterinary school. So I put myself through college. I had jobs, work study, loans, grants. I went 4 years undergrad, University of Washington, and then 4 more years to medical school at Washington State. And I studied hard and I worked hard. But in my free time, I went climbing. Summers, weekends, spring break, whatever, Christmas break, I was out there climbing. And I focused a lot of my attention on Mount Rainier, primarily because it was like a mini Himalayan experience. It's 14,400 feet high, so it's steep, it's glaciated, it's cold, the weather sucks, and I thought this would be the perfect classroom, that perfect stepping stone for me to be able to go to a bigger mountain. And not knowing anything about climbing, I found people with experience that were looking for a climbing partner. So I was kind of the dumb guy on the rope, but I became an apprentice, right? Full-on apprentice, watching, listening, and doing. And one of the first things I learned about was the essence of roping up together in the mountains, on steep terrain where somebody can fall. If there's a crevasse, a big giant gaping crack in the ice, we safeguard each other by connecting to a rope. 2 people at a minimum, sometimes 4 or 5 people, and there's strength and there's synergy when you are connected. If somebody falls, you help that person stop, right? So, but there's also implicit trust. If I'm going to rope to you, you're going to rope to me. We have to trust each other. And we call that the brotherhood of the rope. And it signifies unity and teamwork. And I finally then also started to learn about all the cool equipment that you use in the mountains. The big, heavy, insulated mountain boots, that's where the rubber meets the road. And to help give you traction on steep snow or ice, we strap these sharp metal spikes on the bottom. They're called crampons. And the most important tool that we have is called the ice axe. It creates a third point of balance on steep terrain. And also, more importantly, in the event of a fall, you learn how to stop yourself with that ice axe. It becomes the brake. Either you stop yourself, or if somebody on your rope is falling, you stop that person as well. And the very most important tool that we take with us. You never leave home without the ice axe. And my initial big goal was to try to climb Mount Rainier. And I said, I don't want to do it in the summer when everybody else is doing it. I want to do it in the winter when nobody's around and when it's really hard. And I finally accomplished that goal in the winter of 1978. And when I got to the top, I absolutely loved it. I said, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. And I've met a lot of people, and I've taken a lot of people up mountains, and they do it once, and they go home, and they go, never again, right? Because it was really hard. They didn't have any fun, and they just said, it sounds romantic, but in the end, it is a lot of work. But I said, I absolutely love this. And after a number of years of gaining experience, just being out there, I then applied for and got a very coveted job to work as a guide, a mountain guide on Mount Rainier, for Rainier Mountaineering, and that was in the summer of 1982. And I worked there for 10 straight summers. And my idea behind that was, not only was it a great summer job, but once again, full immersion. Going up and down that mountain 20 times this summer, learning, and also having senior guides, 10, 15 more years experience than me, that I could learn from, was all part of my plan. And some things that I learned along the way as well is, when we're guiding, we're not just listening to what we want to do or how we behave. We have customers, clients that come to us. And we have to make decisions based on their safety. Not on their success, but their safety. Because our number one goal is to keep our customer alive, right? So we learn as guides to constantly have situational awareness, thinking about what could possibly happen and trying to prevent something happening before it does. What's the weather doing? What's the snow conditions like? How fast is my team doing? What's the time of day? All that information is coming at you. And the important thing is you have to learn how to listen to it and act on it. Rather than assuming nothing's going to happen later, take it all in and make a decision based on that. And what we call that, gathering information while we're climbing, we call it listening to the mountain. And ultimately, it's not, again, how far we travel, how much money we paid, how strong our ambition is. That does not decide whether we climb to the top or not. It's the mountain that ultimately decides. And you have to learn to be patient, right? Conditions worsen, you say there's the top, it's not going to happen today. Doesn't mean you failed, it just, you didn't win on that particular day. You go down, you regroup, you go back a week later or a year later. So again, patience is essential. And that listening to the mountain for me was the biggest lesson that I took away from guiding. And because of the senior guide thing that we had going, these guys were going all over the world internationally guiding. And they were always looking for younger guides to take with as assistants. You didn't get paid, but you got to go. And I said, sign me up. And I slowly then got to travel all over the world, going higher and higher, gaining more experience. And for some reason, I always felt that I did pretty well at altitude. You know, I was training hard, I was focused, I was efficient. And as I climbed bigger and bigger peaks with more and more experience, I then eventually started to think, you know, Everest could be a possibility. And as a mountaineer, it's usually on your bucket list. This is the highest point on Earth, 29,000 feet high. And on the summit of which there's only a third the amount of oxygen that there's at sea level. Everest has a pretty colorful history. It's been started, the attempts were started in the 1920s by the British, but it wasn't finally until 1953 that the British went back to Everest, and they had 40 people on this expedition. Half of them were the local Sherpa, you know, the indigenous population. They live at altitude. You go over to Nepal and you hire these guys. They're born and bred at altitude. They carry loads efficiently, and they then become part of your team. And this group of 40 people then worked together for 3 months on that mountain, and ultimately they had success. Once again, only 2 people reached the summit. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. Phenomenal success. Once again, teamwork, right, collaboration was the primary ingredient to success. It happens time and time again. Second to that was the use of supplemental oxygen. Again, you're climbing to 29,000 feet. You're going uphill in deep snow with a big pack with 1/3 the amount of oxygen. You need some sort of help to get you to that altitude. And climbing with supplemental oxygen became the key ingredient to that. And with oxygen, it brings the relative altitude of the mountain down by 10,000 feet. So when you're standing on the summit with oxygen, you're really only kind of standing at 18,000 feet. And I think since the first ascent was done with oxygen, it's kind of the standard or the norm. You go to Everest, of course, you're going to use oxygen, right? Because everybody does. 99.999% of all the people in the world that have climbed Everest use oxygen, right? And for the most part, it's fine, right? Because you just want to get to the summit. You want to do every possible thing you can to help you get to the summit. And I don't have anything against oxygen. But personally, I thought it was kind of a contrived way of gaining success, right? You're going to a 29,000-foot mountain, but you're actually bringing it down so that you can say you stood on the summit. And I have nothing against that personally. If you want to do it that way or have done it that way, absolutely great. For me, it just didn't feel right. I wanted to go and experience the altitude, the physiology. Could I train myself physically to have strength and endurance? Could I learn how to climb efficiently? And more importantly, could I mentally push myself into that rarefied air? For me, it was more important for the experience, right? Not just if I got to the summit, but how I got to the summit. And I made it a hard, fast rule, personally, that if I couldn't do it without oxygen, I never would set foot on the summit of Everest. It had to be a hard, fast rule. I didn't know if I could do it, but that's what I planned for. So I kept climbing, kept gaining experience, and then lo and behold, 10 years after I started, my plan paid off. I got invited on my first Himalayan expedition, and that would be to try to climb Everest. I was invited by one of the senior guides that I've been working for, and he invited me to be part of this team. We weren't guiding. There was just going to be 6 of us climbers going off to Nepal trying to climb this giant mountain. So you travel to Kathmandu, again, you're halfway around the world, and then from Kathmandu you fly to a village where there's an airstrip. You can't drive to the mountain, you can't fly all the way, and at that airstrip then you begin the walk, the trek to Everest Base Camp. And that takes anywhere from 8 to 10 days. So you get to kind of immerse yourself in the culture, right? The people, the food, the religion. It's really an interesting way to journey through these countries. You're climbing a mountain, but you're learning about where you're traveling as well. And even though there's only 8 of us on this trip, we're going to be in the middle of nowhere for 3 months climbing a mountain. So you have to bring a lot of luggage, a lot of stuff. And to get all that stuff to base camp, we hire dozens of local porters. They get a daily wage, and they come with us and walk to base camp carrying a load on their back. And then eventually we arrive at base camp. Base camp is at 18,000 feet. The loads are deposited. We say goodbye to the porters, and we say, see you in 3 months, right? Because we're going to be set up here now. This is our base of operations. And you have to have thought about what you're going to need on that mountain for the next 3 months. If you forgot something, if you didn't do your due diligence, there's no 7-Eleven around the corner. You could fail because you didn't bring enough toilet paper, or you didn't bring enough matches, whatever. And so here begins the process of climbing the mountain. Base camp is 18,000 feet. The summit is at 19. We've got 11,000 feet to go. You can't go from base camp to the summit in one day. Eventually, it's going to take 5 days of continuous climbing to go to the summit. And before we can consider that is 2.5 months away, that summit day. We have to carry loads of equipment to 4 camps, which we establish above base camp. And these camps then are supplied with tents and sleeping bags and food and ropes and oxygen for those that use it, and tents and anchors, all the things we need to live on at those camps. So right out of the gates, we have to collectively work as a team, right? We're all there taking up a spot on the team. That's why we were invited. And you have to contribute. And what that means is, from base camp to wherever, you carry loads of equipment on your back. And you do that day in and day out. That's how the material goes up the mountain. We didn't have a group, that's expensive. So it was just the 8 of us carrying loads. And for the first 10 days or so, all you do is throw on a 60-pound pack, and you climb to where you establish Camp 1, you drop your load, you go back to base camp. The next day you do it again, you go back down. The next day you do it again, you go back down. And you do that over and over and over until there's enough stuff at Camp 1 where you can set up the tents, and you get 2 or 3 guys then that move into that tent. And then you begin the process of establishing Camp 2. So it's a very orderly supply chain of stuff that we're sending up the mountain. 2 or 3 people up above, 2 or 3 people supplying them, and then 2 or 3 people at the bottom supplying the people supplying the bottom. This pyramid of supplies. As you go higher, you're shocking your body to acclimatize. And what that means is you're building more red blood cells based on the hypoxia. You go up high, you come back down. You go back to that altitude, you feel a little better. You go back down. You go back and you feel even better. But then there's a limit. As you climb above Camp 3, approaching Camp 4, you're now approaching 26,000, 27,000, and your body can barely acclimatize at this point. And that going up and down is also quite, as you can imagine, debilitating. That's all you're doing is carrying a weight on your back every single day. So it's hard to stay motivated and say, God, this is fun, right? And as we approach Camp 4, 26,000 feet, because of the lack of oxygen, you can't carry 60 pounds. You might be able to carry 25. So that supply chain starts to trickle, and in spite of our efforts, it's all we could do to get one little tiny 5-pound tent set up at high camp with just enough supplies for 2 people. Exactly what happened in 1953. They had one little tiny camp at the high camp for 2 people, and that's how the logistics of all that works. So we climb all the way to Camp 4, we set up the tent, fill up supplies, and then what do? We go all the way back to base camp. We don't go for the summit yet. We need to come down, we need to recover a little bit, and we need to, very importantly now, wait for a window of weather that will allow us to climb back all the way to Camp 4, spend that final night, and then from there, push to the summit on the 5th day. The hardest day by far is still ahead of us. But we're already 10 weeks into this. So, we know Camp 4 only allows for 2 people. How do we pick those 2 people? We're back at base camp, we're sitting around in the tent, and ultimately it's up to the leader, the guy that organized and raised the money and put the team together. He looks around the room and he says, so, show of hands, who wants to go to the summit? Nobody raises their hand. Because by now you just want to go home, right? You're tired, your motivation is gone, you've lost 15 pounds, all the motivation you had in the bar 6 months ago is gone. Yeah, I'm going to Everest. I just want to go home. And that's how a lot of these expeditions end. They just fizzle out through lack of strength, through lack of endurance. I was one of the guys selected to go to the summit. And the way you pick people is based on who's still strong, who's still motivated, but also who has contributed. And when it all comes together in the end, you get picked to go for the summit. And I got to go then with the leader of the climb. Big, huge event for me. My first trip to Everest, and I get to try for the summit. So we wait for what we hope is a window of weather. We need at least 5 days, right, to get to the summit. No weather reporting in those days. You had a barometer, and that was it. And off we go. Leave base camp. 4 days later, we're back at Camp 4. Again, this is 26,000 feet. We're camping above the clouds. And we're going to make a really early start the next day. So we've got a lot of stuff to do that evening. And the main thing we got to do is hydrate. When you're breathing at altitude, you're expending a lot of vapor out of your mouth, and you easily get hydrated. And your blood gets thicker because of that. And if your blood gets thick, you get clots and you die. So hydration is essential. Believe it or not, you don't have any appetite up here. Appetite is suppressed by altitude. You can barely force yourself to eat. You might split a candy bar, and that's dinner, believe it or not. And the plan then is for the alarm to go off at midnight, that night, so that we can be out the door and climbing by 1 or 2 in the morning with headlamps on. Climb out of the tent, 30 below zero, and the reason you start so early is you know that once you get going from that camp, you calculate about 12 hours to climb to the summit. That's a long, long day. And very importantly, even after leaving the summit, it's going to take 5 or 6 hours to get back to that camp. So that's an 18-hour round trip of a day. Very, very hard physically. And you want to get back to camp before it gets dark, before the weather gets bad. So that's called the alpine start. And we do that all over the world. We do it on Mount Rainier, we do it on Everest. You start really early. And things were going well. I'm climbing with my partner, Eric. He's using oxygen. I'm climbing without oxygen. I'm doing okay. I I'd never been that high before, and with every step I take, I'm breaking my own new personal altitude record. And we're going, God, things are great. We're working our way up the mountain, and we finally then get 300 feet from the summit of Everest. This is the final section of the summit ridge. And at those altitudes, gaining that last 300 feet could take 2 hours. So we still have a ways to go. And at that point, the weather started to close in on us. We could tell a storm was imminent. It was getting windy, losing visibility, it started to snow, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And we thought, not what's happening now, but if we continue to the summit, what's it going to be like in 2 hours? And we thought right there and then that the risk was too great. We thought we could get to the top, but we thought we wouldn't get down. So based on our perceived risk, we decided right there to stop and to turn around and to go home. And that was the end of the expedition. There was no other way to go again, no other people available, we couldn't regroup. That's it, one and done. And imagine making that decision. You know it's logical, but you can imagine why people continue, right? There's the summit, 300 feet away. My once-in-a-lifetime chance. I've spent a lot of money to be here. My social media fans are following me. We have to go to the summit. And that's what causes the issue, right? People don't listen to the mountain and aren't willing to turn around. We did. And we went home. And I was like, God, the guy I was with that taught me how to listen to the mountain, together we made that decision. And I said, that's fine. It was a great experience. We did what we're supposed to do. We didn't fail. We did our best. And the mountain's going to be there for a long time. And I think in my heart, I knew I would more than likely have another opportunity to climb Everest. And that's a big part of it as well, right? It wasn't just a one-time shot. I got to go back to Everest the following year. With a different team, I got another invitation. We had horrendous conditions that year. So there's 2 strikes against me on Everest. And from that point on, 1987 on, I literally went, for the next 20 years, went on at least 1, if not 2 Himalayan expeditions every single year. So I was now in what I call the big leagues, and I loved being there. My third expedition the following year, a mountain called Kanchenjunga, third highest mountain in the world, not often climbed, about 800 feet lower than Everest, but technically a little bit harder. This is a 3,000-foot sheet of ice that we had to climb on our way to the summit. So even though Everest is, the highest and maybe physically without oxygen, it's the hardest, technically there's a lot of other very demanding, if not more demanding peaks out there than Everest. And after 2.5 months of effort, 3 of us got to the top of Kanchenjunga. This was on my very, very first summit of an 8,000-meter peak. And here we are in this little island in the sky above the clouds, and people say, how long do you stay up there? Depends on the time of day, depends on the weather. We got to stay up there for an hour. And that's about the most. I've been on summits for 3 minutes. Beautiful day, though. And you're standing there and you take in the view. And this is looking 80 miles off to the west. And there, just left of center, the big white pyramid is Everest. And even though I was on Kanchenjunga, I was like, I got 300 feet of unfinished business on Everest. And I desperately wanted to try to go back. So, do you celebrate on the top? Kind of, but not full on, right? Because you got to think about it, that, you're really only half done with your mission, right? You still have to get down. And if you haven't planned for going down, you're probably not going to make it down. A lot of people forget, and they use all of their resources, their energy, their daylight, their oxygen, just to get themselves to the top. And then there's no gas in the tank to get home. And I always plan on my descent before I plan my ascent. Everything is dictated by going down. And most accidents and deaths in the mountains occur on the way down. simply because of that, right? A climb is not a climb by definition until you're at the bottom, taking your boots off. The following year, my third invitation to try Everest once again. We climbed along the left-hand skyline, which is the North Ridge. We spent the requisite 10 weeks carrying loads, building camps, acclimatizing, and then finally, in early May of that year, I was allowed once again to try to go for the summit. And on this particular summit day, I was alone. It's just the way the logistics of the climb worked out. And I thought, skill set I had. I didn't need to be roped up to anybody. But the hard part about being alone, going uphill on Everest for 12 hours is being alone, right? The snow is deep. Nobody to help kick the steps and break the trail. Nobody to motivate with. Nobody to make decisions with, right? You're relying completely on yourself. And as I look back on that day, physically, mentally, the hardest day of my life. Literally, because of the lack of oxygen, I had to breathe 15 times before I could even think about taking another step. And breathe 15 times, and then take another step. And I had to force myself into that rhythm and into that pace. I couldn't go any faster, but if I went any slower, I wouldn't get anywhere. So 15 breaths, walk. 15 breaths, walk. And imagine 8 or 10 hours into a day like that. You're struggling, you're gasping for air, you got snot frozen on your face, and you're like, why am I doing this, right? And there's no logical reason, but you do it because you want to. And then the other thing you start thinking about as you're suffering is you're going, how can I quit? What's my excuse, right? I said it was too cold, it took too long, I wasn't having fun. All that stuff's legitimate. You could quit and go down. But I kept telling myself, hey, don't cave in, right? Don't use a fake excuse. Perfect day. Keep going. And I did keep going. And 12 hours after leaving camp, I took those last steps, struggling along, gasping for air in this beautiful ether atmosphere, and then I finally stood on the summit of Everest. And thank you. It's pretty cool to be on the top of the world alone. Very rare, doesn't happen often, hardly happens today. Really cool to be there, standing there, looking down on everything and everyone else on Earth. Highest man on Earth without drugs. And, but then I thought to myself, wow, who's going to take my picture, right? So I had an idea. I had my ice with me, and I stuck it in the ground vertically, and I balanced my clunky SLR film camera. That's all we had in those days. On top of that ice axe, I set the timer, I set the aperture, I set the focus. I got into position, and I heard the camera go click. And you don't know how the film's going to turn out, right? It wasn't until a month later I got home, had the film developed, and I saw that I got my own selfie then from the top of Everest. Yeah, thank you. A lot harder in those days to take a photo. So one of the coolest moments of my life to having climbed Everest and to be there alone was pretty amazing. So I then thought, what do I do now? Right? I wanted to keep elevating myself, take what I learned and push myself to another level, right? That's what all people do, right? You get to a level, you don't go flat and steady. You go, I got to keep climbing. And for me, my next objective was to climb this mountain called K2. Second highest mountain in the world. It's only 700 feet lower than Everest. And we as mountaineers look at this as more of a holy grail than Everest because of how hard it is, how technical, how steep, how bad the weather. I mean, it rebuffs, year after year, rebuffs people to climb it. And in 1992, I felt ready to try. I felt I had the experience. And I joined forces with a friend of mine from Seattle, Scott Fisher. Scott was running a small guide service called Mountain Madness. We scraped the money together. We couldn't build our own team or expedition. And we then joined forces with a group of climbers at base camp. And this mountain is in Pakistan. So we go all the way over there, we meet all these climbers, and there was 2s and 3s and 4s, and I said, we've got to coordinate our efforts, right? Because if we don't unify and collaborate, we're never going to climb this mountain. So I kind of became the de facto climbing leader. And this is kind of the average angle of terrain on K2. 45 degrees from bottom to top, very steep, icy, rocky, and to ensure our safety and knowing that we're going to go up and down this terrain day after day carrying loads to establish camps, we fix rope onto the mountain, either with screws or with anchors into the rock. And this rope, then, this fixed rope, becomes a safety line or a hand line for us to ascend and, more importantly, to descend very safely and quickly. This is a typical camp on K2, right? 45 degrees. How do you set up a tent? You build a little platform with snow and ice and rock, and then you park your little tent on there. And a lot of times it's so steep. I mean, you stay tied into the rope, which is anchored into the mountain when you go to bed. Because you're going to roll out of the bed, roll out the door. So pretty precarious stuff. We had a lot of stuff happen on K2. And, whenever I go to one of these mountains, I try to do my homework. I want to become familiar with what that mountain does and has done, And I knew that K2 had storms, and there was going to be avalanches, and there might be a rescue or two, and it's going to be long, and it's going to be not fun. I mean, I knew all that, and I prepared myself mentally for that, and all that stuff that I'd read about happened. And I think because of that, a lot of people who weren't prepared, they kind of started to give up. 2.5 months into that trip, they lost motivation, they lost patience, and they just said, you know what, I didn't sign up for this. I don't want this. And most of the team went out. And Scott and I and a handful of others, we decided to stay, and we waited, and we went up, and we go down, up and down, over and over and over and over, until we finally thought we got another window of weather. And then for the first time, we made a break for it. This is now 2.5 months into this, and we then, for the first time, got to an established Camp 4. On this event, we carried everything with us, we set up the tent, and we decided we're going to stay here, and from here, we're going to go to the summit tomorrow. We didn't have enough time to go down and go back up again. So, you got to chop a platform in the snow, put up this little tiny tent, and they're very lightweight. They weigh only about 5 pounds. And a very unique way to make things lighter, real secret, is you make it smaller. This tent is barely big enough for 2 people. It's the size of a single bed. But it's not made for comfort. It's made for protection, because we're going to hopefully spend one short night, and then the next day climb that final 2,200 vertical feet to the summit. And as you can see on K2, it gets steeper the higher you go. This mountain is relentless. And because of that, you have to learn how to be relentless as well. So tomorrow is our big day. This night is like the night before our Super Bowl or the gold medal, right? But we're not in the Four Seasons Hotel getting massage, a buffet table, watching a flat screen TV. We're 2 guys crammed into this little tiny tent waiting for the alarm to go off. And we'd set the alarm for midnight because we wanted to be at the door at 1 o'clock in the morning and go for it. You're nervous, you're anxious, you're worried. What's going to happen tomorrow? And during the night, yet another storm comes in. And during that night, that storm dumped 3 feet of snow on us. And this is what we woke up to. I mean, we had to get, during the night, every hour literally, to shovel the snow off the tent to keep it from collapsing. And when we woke up, we said, we can't climb in these conditions. It's still storming. It's still too dangerous. We can't go up today. What should we do? We're barely surviving at 26,000 feet. Again, no appetite. And because of hypoxia, you're not really recovering. You're actually slowly dying, believe it or not, called the death zone. And we started to talk, what do we do? Well, let's go down, right? Let's go all the way back to base camp to safety. And And we thought, man, if we do that, we're not going to make it back up here. It's too late in the season. The snow's going to be way too deep. Let's just stay here and wait. Okay, let's stay here and wait. And we ended up staying and waiting here in this tent for 3 days. This is where you really, really, really have to like who you're with, right? Imagine grab the person next to you and climb into the closet and stay there for 3 days. And what do you do up there, right? We're going to carry a book with us, no form of entertainment, no iPad, no music, no nothing. I've been with Scott for 3 months. There's nothing left to talk about. And you're wondering, too, will I be strong enough after sitting here slowly deteriorating in 3 days to actually be able to climb to the summit? And nobody had done that. And I said, you know what? It's mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. Right? So it became kind of this mental thing. And in fact, there was another American that was just below us, Charlie Mace. And after 3 days of waiting, we had this window of opportunity. The weather cleared, and we were then able to take advantage of it. So you kind of got to be at the right place at the right time, to take advantage of an opportunity, and we happened to be there. And thankfully, on that final summit day, we were strong enough, and 10 hours after leaving camp, we got to the summit of K2. And that was actually one of the hardest tests I've ever had. And what I learned from that climb was how to be patient, how to be resilient, and how to just be comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if you start complaining, you're going to not make it. You just got to accept the situation. And we got to the top of K2 and walked away. And K2 is one of those mountains where you climb it once, you don't ever bother going back. That's it. So now I looked at my resume, and pretty much by accident, I had now climbed the 3 highest mountains in the world: Everest, K2, Kanchenjunga. And at this point in my life, also I came to what I call a fork in the road as far as what my career was going to be, right? Because even though I was going on expeditions, being gone 3 months at a time, once or twice a year, somehow I was still able to work as a veterinarian. I had a boss who was a friend of mine. He gave me time off. But eventually, it started to come to the point where, he wasn't too happy with me being gone all the time. And he kind of said to me, Ed, you've got to make a decision. You're going to go climb mountains, or you're going to work as a doctor. And I knew I kind of had to make a choice. If I wanted to do one thing well, I had to do that one thing. And this is probably the biggest career risk I took, because at that point I decided I'm going to go climb more mountains. And I walked away from my career as a veterinarian. And that's very similar, I think, to people that have startups, right? You walk away from the job, you're comfortable, there's income, there's security. You walk away from that and you start at zero and try to make it work. And that's what I did. And it was scary. Let me go back one. And my decision was based on the thing that I thought I wanted to do. I climbed the 3 highest peaks in the world. I then decided to climb all 14 of the 8,000-meter peaks as a project. And I called it Endeavor 8,000. I figured I'd done 3. There's only 11 left. And so that was my goal. And I didn't care how long it took. I didn't give myself a time limit. I thought it's going to take at least another 10 years, if not 15 more years. So I went on this journey. As in anybody that has a startup, as I was starting up, I needed investors, right? I needed money. I needed income, and I needed money to pay for my expeditions. So I had relationships at that point with a lot of outdoor companies, small companies, and a startup called Expedia out of Seattle that I started working for. And they were giving me free stuff. That was great for a while. And I said, I love your free stuff, but now for me to want to use your free stuff, you have to pay me to use your free stuff. But in return for their investment, right, I had to give something in return. I said, I will help grow your brand. I will help develop and design products. I'll go to sales meetings, I'll go to trade shows, And as long as I could show them they were getting a return in their investment, I was able to create long-term relationships. And that's then how I became a professional mountaineer. I was working for a handful of companies 9 months of the year so that then I could go climbing 3 months of the year. And most of the money obviously comes from marketing, right? So I end up looking like a race car driver, right? They got the logos and the flags and the patches and the hats, and it's all about marketing. It's all about marketing. It was hard. I mean, I had moments of doubt, when I was making zero money, thinking, what have I done? I've walked away from a career as a veterinarian to climb mountains. But eventually it started to build, and things started to get better. But it took a long time. And the next thing I had to do was find the partners that I was going to go on all these journeys with. And I thought, if I go 10, 15 more years, how do I keep a team together, right? It gets complicated. But if I could find one person out there doing what I'm doing in the same way, a two-person partnership, that would be perfect, right? It'd be efficient, it'd be inexpensive, we'd rely on each other. And so I started looking for that perfect person. I was mountain dating, you might think. The number one criteria I had was I had to like that person, right? Because if I don't like you here at sea level, I won't like you at 26,000 feet. And also implicit trust, right? Roping and connecting to somebody in a dangerous arena. And in 1995, I met and started climbing with this guy on your left, Ed Viesturs from Finland. I was introduced to him. We started climbing together. I liked him. I trusted him. He was doing what I was doing. And then we partnered up. And the beauty of Veka on top of that was, in 1993, he became the first Finnish person to climb Everest. And in a country of 5 million people, he was a Michael Jordan superstar. So he had financial resources. He had sponsors. He could pay for half of his thing. I could pay for my half. He even had his own action figure. This is the mountain climbing Veka doll. And it even comes with a Yeti. So he knew about marketing. And we got to talk about how we raised our money and how the business worked. So he to me was that perfect partner. And then we ended up climbing together as a two-man team for the next 10 years. We'd go these giant mountains, just the two of us. No support, no fuss, no mess, really fun adventure. We worked our butts off. And the beauty was that, we knew we were going to carry our own stuff. Nobody's going to carry our stuff. And as we were working with all the companies that was creating our stuff, we could help them to refine it. We tested it. We said, we want it smaller. We want it lighter. We want it durable. And that's how we then worked hand in hand with the people that were providing us with the equipment. And they loved the process as well because they learned something from us as they developed their process or their products. We're going on these big mountains, and we find ourselves completely alone. And this view right there, just left of center on the top, is Everest. And this is like early 2000s. On Everest, there's probably 1,000 people right now. On this particular mountain, there's 2 of us. And we had to think about that as we were climbing. We're alone. And every decision we make has a consequence. There's nobody there to rescue us. You can't fly a helicopter that high. If there's an injury or an accident, I'm helping you, you're helping me. So you have to learn how to be safe and learn how to be conservative and how to be thoughtful as well, because you're far removed from anything. And I thought we had tremendous success. For 3 expeditions, every 3 trips we went on, 2 out of those 3 were successful. And in the big mountains, that's a pretty good batting average. What I'm more proud about is the fact that in my entire career, 40 plus years, never had an accident, never needed a rescue, never lost a finger or toe to frostbite, and very more importantly, never lost a climbing partner. And that's very rare in my world. It's very common when you get on the plane to Nepal with 6 friends to go do one of these mountains. there's a good chance there's going to be an empty seat on the plane when you come home. And that's not something I ever wanted to experience. And I'm very, very proud of that safety record. And we had a good batting average. But there were lumps and bumps along the way. There were mountains that caused us, a non-success. This is a mountain in Pakistan called Broad Peak. We spent 2.5 months on this thing, and on our push to the summit, we were forced to stop 100 feet from the top because of dangerous snow conditions. We couldn't circumvent that to get to the top. And we walked away 100 feet from the top. And you can imagine, I saw this a lot in my peer group. You're climbing along, you've got this big goal, you're getting close to finishing that big goal, and along the way, the media starts following you. You have a fan base that's following you. You have sponsors that are hoping you're successful. You're personally wanting to be done. And all those external pressures then start to change your rules of engagement. You start to break the rules to please others, right? And you start taking shortcuts. And you start thinking, I'm already on that fine line. And I don't want to step over that edge. I don't want to take a shortcut. But you have that temptation and you have that pressure, simply to finish, simply to get home earlier, simply to save some money. And when you live in an environment of risk, you can become comfortable with that risk, right? You become complacent. Oh, it's never happened before, it won't happen today, I'm going to break the rule. A lot of those people that I saw in the mountains do that never came home. Again, it's all about being patient. Didn't happen that year. We go all the way down, we go all the way home. 2 or 3 or 4 years later, we go back to Broad Peak and we climb that last 100 feet to the summit. So it might not happen today, but it'll happen tomorrow. It'll happen the next year. You just got to keep trying. And that's one of those big things that I learned as well. So, 16, 17 years go by. I'm climbing all these mountains, going on these journeys with Veka, beautiful mountains in Pakistan, Nepal, Tibet. And after 17 years into that journey, I had one mountain left. I'd climbed 13, and the last mountain, Annapurna. Lo and behold, this mountain that I read about as a kid that made me be here. And people think, oh, you left Annapurna for the end. It's going to be a cool story. I actually tried Annapurna twice earlier in my career. And it turns out that objectively and notoriously, Annapurna is the most dangerous of these 8,000-meter peaks. Objectively, it has avalanches that shower down all of its faces unpredictably. And you can't run away from an avalanche like that. Only 180 people had climbed Annapurna, and 60 had died. That's a 1 out of 3, statistically. And after my first 2 attempts on Annapurna, that mountain scared me. I'd never been afraid of a mountain. And I said, that's uncontrolled risk. I could be the fastest, smartest, best mountaineer in the world. I can't survive Annapurna. And I thought to myself, don't die on Annapurna. That won't look good on the resume, right? And I convinced myself for a while, don't go back, right? Be happy with 13. You almost did what you wanted to do. There's, no big deal if you don't, right? Who cares except you? And I almost let it go for about a minute. I said, I got to go back, right? I can't make the decision at home. I want to go all the way back to Annapurna with my buddy Veka, and we're going to go to the bottom of it, and we're going to let it tell us face to face, not at home thinking it could be good, thinking it might be bad, but to be there and look at it and see it. And so we made the decision to do that in the spring of 2005, and we promised everybody that was our plan. And I promised my wife, and believe it or not, she allowed me to do this. We've been married for 10 years, we have 2 kids, but she trusted me, right? She knew something could possibly happen, but she believed in my decision-making, how I trained, how I did what I did, and I thank her for letting me do that. She never once said no. And to have somebody like that at home when you go to work that's kind of cheering you on, I mean, that person elevates you, right? That person is part of your team. And so the spring of 2005, Vic and I, we go back to Annapurna, we sit at the bottom, we watch it, we listen to it, and conditions were absolutely phenomenal. It was colder that year, it was drier, and there was no avalanche activity to speak of. And then and there we decided we're going for it. We are at the right place at the right time. Here we are climbing under stuff that would normally be falling apart and avalanching. The mountain was glued together. Wasn't not an easy climb. There was some steeper technical sections. But, we'd been together at that point for 10 years. So we had hours and hours of nonverbal communication. We knew telepathically what we were thinking and the decisions we were making somehow together. And then finally on May 12th, we took those last steps together and we got to the top of Annapurna. Thank you. For me, this was a dream come true moment. Something I dreamt about, planned for. I visualized this moment for 18 years, the 14th peak. And to actually be sitting there, it was an amazing feeling. And again, no trophy, no medal. ESPN wasn't up there to interview us. You just do it to do it. And we made it back down to the bottom. Vika helped me count them up. I can't count that high with two hands. And in fact, he still had 3 more 8,000-meter peaks to go, which he eventually did climb with some other people. So he finished as well as the Finn. And then I looked back on Annapurna. Why was it at the end? I didn't plan for it to be at the end, but ultimately, I'm glad it was. I needed 30 years of experience to tackle that thing, to do it right, to survive it, to make the right decisions. So it came at the right time in my career. And I think you'll have an objective in your career where you're like, I'm ready today. 5 years I wouldn't be ready, but today I'm ready. And that was for me appropriate, and then obviously poetically too. This book that I read as a kid that inspired me to go down this path, my life literally now had come full circle. And I'm leaving now with this book, a book that changed my life. Pictured on the summit here is the author, Maurice Herzog, the leader of the climb, one of 2 people to reach the summit. And the very last sentence of the book, he says that we all have our own Annapurnas. And I think that's an amazing metaphor for business or for life. Your life is a series of mountains, right? It's not a flat plain like Illinois. It's a lumpy, bumpy horizon of mountains. And they're usually going to get bigger, right? If you're running a business, growing a business, you don't want to go to the same altitude next year. You're going to climb higher, right? You're going to grow. You're going to expand. You're going to take what you learned and the experience you gained and go to another peak. And that's what makes life interesting. That's what makes businesses grow. So you make that commitment, like, I'm going to start climbing again for next year, day by day, step by step. Some days you're going to make huge gains, right? Some days you go 0. Some days you feel like, man, I'm going backwards. But it's the days you go backwards, you don't give up, right? You keep plugging along. It's a lumpy, bumpy road to success, but it typically keeps going up. So you do that for yourself, but then obviously surrounding yourself with partners, your teammates, your coworkers, your family, your friends, they're part of your team, right? So there's partnership, there's planning, there's preparation, there's patience, there's persistence. I think the key to success in any endeavor, whether it's business, whether it's climbing, is passion, right? If you love what you do, you won't complain about how hard it is. You won't care about how long it takes, and you'll do it forever. Good luck on your own Annapurna. Thank you. We have some time for questions. You're going to hand the mic out? Okay. Yes.
Mine's working.
No.
Got a question here.
Tell us on the food. What did you eat for 90 days, and how did you determine calories and all that kind of stuff? It's relatively non-scientific. You eat what you like and you eat what you can. I mean, obviously, lower down, base camp and all that, we have local foods that we typically have a local cook, and in Asia, it's rice and dal and lentils and maybe some chicken and oatmeal and pancakes. And as we go up the mountain, right, we have to carry the food, so it has to be easy to cook. Instant freeze-dried meals, cup of soup, everything's dehydrated or dried, compact, like dried fruits, nuts, salamis, cheeses, crackers, cookies. And the higher you go, you've got to decide, based on my not having any kind of appetite, what do I feel like eating at 26,000 feet? And that becomes a trial and error. I mean, when you go to the grocery and try to eat a power bar at sea level, you can't eat a power bar at 26,000 feet. So what do you eat? You eat Pop-Tarts. Seriously. So for me, it's never been scientific. It's like, what can I eat? What do I feel like eating? It's not like a certain amount of carbs, a certain amount of proteins, and you're going to lose weight, right? There's no way around it. Yeah. Here we go.
The question I have is, how did you prepare to do it without oxygen?
Well, that just means mentally it's going to be really hard. Physically, you have to train for endurance and strength. And that's 8 or 10 months of preparation. Day in and day out, very, very hard physical labor. Part of it is physiology. Certain people just can't do it. Their bodies just don't allow them to go that high. So it's not one single thing. It's a whole bunch of things together. How to climb efficiently and go from point A to point B without wasting any energy. And so I didn't know if I could do it. But you have to have the mindset to try. And I've talked to a lot of people where they say, well, I'm going to try without oxygen. And the way they kind of say that, once they're up there and once it gets hard, they're going to grab the oxygen just to go to the summit. You got to say, flat out, no oxygen. Yes.
But how much do they cost for one of these expeditions?
I mean, I can't tell you exactly what it costs to run an expedition. You've got to buy a permit from the government of the country that the mountain's in. It depends on the size of the team. It depends on how much oxygen people are bringing. Obviously, the more people, the more food, the more tents, the more ropes. When I went with my buddy Vika, it was simple. Just 2 of us. It's airfare. We had the equipment. We'd buy the food, and we could do it for under $8,000 an expedition each. But if you go on if you were a client now going on a guided expedition to Everest, you're going to pay upwards of $60,000 to $100,000 to be a client on Everest. So I did it kind of on the cheap. And when I was earning a living as a climber, I thought, man, the less I spend on my expeditions, the more money I have left over to pay my mortgage and buy gas and food and diapers and all that. Yeah. Yes. It's not really. Believe it or not, all these countries, whether it's Pakistan, Nepal, tourism is a huge part of their industry. They want tourists. They want to sell permits. Rather than restricting, they're like, come buy our permits, right? That's how they make money. And that's kind of the problem on Everest these days is the floodgates have opened and the Nepal government makes a huge amount of money selling permits. They'd rather have more than less. Yeah. Yes.
So when you were shuttling all the equipment back and forth, up and down, when you do the descent, are you repeating that?
Are you repeating?
All that stuff down?
At the end, all that stuff that we've carried up, at the end of the climb, at whether we've reached the summit or not, the new ethic rule is that you bring it all down. It's called leave no trace. And historically, that didn't happen. Expeditions would go up there, they'd leave their tents, they'd leave oxygen bottles, and they'd go home and they'd say, nobody's going to come up here again. But with that same attitude, you can imagine the amount of stuff that got left behind. And it was in the early 90s that we then said, hey, we're going there all the time. We need to not only clean up after ourselves, we need to start cleaning up what other people have left. And it's still in the process of, and I've been to Everest recently, and it's cleaner than I've seen it before. So it's a mindset and it's an attitude, but the new thing is way better than it used to be. Yeah.
Thank you for that great presentation on mountain climbing, which I know zero, because when I came here, I said, well, what's the risks? Like you die or you don't die. I mean, business is easy compared to that. For me, it was just time and money for my previous failed businesses, but I liked what you said about the two types of risks and all of the planning that went into that. So, great education, Norm. I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi there. So I'm so glad you lived to tell the tale. The whole time I was walking, I was just like, well, he's alive in front of us, so I guess it's going to end well. But I'm really curious, did you ever have a moment that you like slipped or had like a scare where you thought, oh crap, it's over?
Yeah, it was actually on K2. Earlier on in that expedition, there were some climbers that went to the summit. They went very late. They got caught up high. They had to spend the night out just below the summit. They were desperately in need of assistance, a rescue, you might say. Scott and I were the closest people to them. We were hoping to go to the summit, but we got diverted. And we were then climbing up to them to help bring them down. And it was a nasty day. There was a lot of snow. Avalanche risk was super high. And we actually got caught in an avalanche. And we were both together. We were tumbling down the slope. And in the snow, in that avalanche, and I managed to stop myself with my ice axe, the thing that you learn to do. And because I stopped, the rope came tight, and I stopped Scott as well. So that worked. The avalanche kept going without us, and that was the closest call I've ever had. But we were doing something, obviously trying to save somebody, but climbing in a situation we normally wouldn't have been climbing. And I think that's what people do. When other people's lives are at stake, you're like, okay, it's worth the risk. And it's like firefighters, right? They run into burning buildings. But actually, that was the closest call. Yeah.
Did you ever have any problems with the geopolitical issues in a country like Pakistan?
Well, never had a problem in Pakistan, but it got a little scary. My first trip there was 92. And then after that, I made 4 more trips, the last one being 2003. And I felt a little nervous. I was like, I'm going to keep a low profile. Somebody gave me a Canada baseball cap, so I became Canadian. For the most part, though, when you go to Pakistan, the people are wonderful, right? They're welcoming. They want tourists. It's just that small fraction of people you don't want to have to bump into. And as long as you keep a low profile, don't go into a crowd, go out into the boonies and climb, it's okay. And it has gotten a lot better. There's people that go there all the time now, Americans for climbing. So it definitely got better. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious how your relationship to risk changed throughout your career, especially your tolerance for risk or how you manage it, especially with changes in your life off the mountain.
From the beginning, even from the start, when I was single, whatever, I said, I don't want to die climbing. I knew that right away. But the problem is you don't know how to evaluate risk when you don't know how to evaluate it, right? And as you gain more experience and as you see what could potentially happen, the thing is you learn how to take in more information and make decisions on that. And if anything, I got more conservative, but it wasn't by accident. I didn't say, well, I'm married now, I need to be more conservative. I just wanted to stay alive for me. And so I always had that attitude. And I ended up climbing a few times with people that were willing to risk more. And, you can't say that's good or bad, but I just simply politely said, You go find another group of people to climb with, and I'll find my own group, and that's okay. I just tried to then gravitate toward very conservative, patient climbers. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about as the pressures from the outside. Climbers would start to they push beyond their limits.
Yeah.
In '96, you were leading an IMAX team on Everest. Is that what happened during that season? Just
in my opinion, yeah. If you've read the story into thin air, where 8 people died, it was in my opinion, Rob Hall leading his team, Scott Fisher leading his team. There was a lot of external pressure causing those guys to climb when they shouldn't have. Money. Their clients were paying $50,000 each. They had 8 clients each. They had journalists with them. They needed success this year, so they have groups signing up with them next year. There's 2 competitors on the mountain. All that stuff. I could see it unfolding. And in the end, I think that's what caused them to keep going when they shouldn't. And that's where I think business changed the rules of them being mountaineers, right? Their mountaineering decisions got pushed to the side, and it all became about business and competition and success. Thank you, guys.
Testing. Thank you, everybody, for coming this afternoon. You are the driving force behind our local economy, and because of you, we can have talks and presentations like this, so we can continue doing this. There's a little survey. Please fill this out and leave your survey and your name tags in the basket at the back. Thank you, Ed, so much for coming today. We have a little gift for you.
Oh my God. Look at a belt buckle. Where's my next presentation? Thank you. Really, really cool. Thank you so much.
And I love that Brad invited you here today and had this idea, because honestly, all I ever know about mountain climbing, I learned from Sylvester Stallone. So